Eleanora Finch coughed, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes. The roar of cannons was a constant companion now, a deafening symphony of destruction. She tightened her grip on the reins, urging her weary horse forward through the mud. "Move it, Finch," Sergeant Davies barked, his voice raspy. "We ain't got all day to coddle your mare." Eleanora ignored him, focusing on the tree line ahead. It offered the only semblance of cover in this blasted field. The air tasted of gunpowder and fear, a metallic tang that clung to the back of her throat. She could feel the vibrations of the earth with each passing artillery barrage. "Another deserter, eh, Finch?" Davies sneered, riding alongside her. "Heard you're due for your monthly leave. Thinking of joining the Greybacks?" Eleanora spat, the spittle disappearing into the muddy ground. "I fight for the Union, Sergeant. Unlike some, I don't run at the first sign of trouble." Davies chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "We'll see, Finch, we'll see." He spurred his horse forward, leaving Eleanora choking in his dust. She pressed on, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't just about duty. This was about survival. And something more, something she couldn't quite articulate, but that burned within her like a banked fire. She reached the tree line, dismounted, and tethered her horse. The relative quiet of the woods was a welcome relief, a brief respite from the chaos of the battlefield. A twig snapped behind her. Eleanora whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for the Colt Peacemaker strapped to her thigh. "Who's there?" A figure emerged from the shadows, gaunt and pale. It was Thomas, one of the younger privates from her company. "Finch," he whispered, his voice trembling. I can't do this anymore." Eleanora lowered her hand, her expression softening. "What's wrong, Thomas?" "The shelling. The bodies. I can't sleep. I see their faces, Finch. Every time I close my eyes." He choked back a sob. "I'm going home. I'm deserting." Eleanora looked at him, her gaze steady. She knew that look, that desperation. She had seen it reflected in her own eyes countless times. "I understand, Thomas," she said quietly. "But running won't solve anything. It'll just haunt you worse." "Then what do I do, Finch? What do I do?" he pleaded, his eyes wide with terror. Eleanora paused, considering her options. She couldn't let him desert. Not now. Not when she needed him. "I have a proposition for you, Thomas," she said, her voice low and urgent. "A way to fight without firing a shot. A way to make a real difference." He looked at her, confusion clouding his face. "What are you talking about?" "Meet me here tomorrow night. After dark. And bring a change of clothes." Eleanora turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing alone in the shadows. He had no idea what she was planning, but she knew this was her chance. A chance to prove herself, a chance to make a difference, a chance to finally understand the truth behind her monthly leave, and a chance to use Thomas as her pawn. "Meet me here tomorrow night. After dark, and bring a change of clothes." Eleanora turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing alone in the shadows. He had no idea what she was planning, but she knew this was her chance. A chance to prove herself, a chance to make a difference, a chance to finally understand the truth behind her monthly leave, and a chance to use Thomas as her pawn. The next night, Eleanora found Thomas waiting, his face pale in the moonlight. He clutched a small bundle wrapped in burlap. "I brought them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What is it you want me to do?" She stepped closer, her gaze intense. "I need you to desert, Thomas, for real this time." His eyes widened in alarm. But I can't. I'll be shot." "Not if you do it right. I have a contact, a woman who can get you across the lines." "To the Confederacy." Eleanora watched him carefully, gauging his reaction. "The Confederacy. Why would I go there?" "Because you're going to be our eyes and ears, Thomas. You're going to be a spy." He sputtered, shaking his head. "I can't do that. I don't know anything about spying." Eleanora smirked. "You don't have to know anything. You just have to listen. Eavesdrop, remember what you hear, and then you come back to me." "Come back? But how?" Thomas's fear was palpable. "That's where my contact comes in. She'll get you back safely, with information that could win us this war." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Think about it, Thomas. You can sit here scared and useless, waiting to be killed in some pointless skirmish, or you can become a hero, a real hero, fighting for the Union in a way no one else dares to. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. What kind of information? Anything and everything. Troop movements, supply lines, fortifications, anything that could give us an advantage. Eleonora leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Think of the lives you could save, Thomas. Think of the war you could end. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets in the nearby fields. Finally he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "All right," he said, his voice trembling. "I'll do it. But I swear, if this gets me killed—" "It won't," Eleonora said, her voice firm. "Not if you listen to me. Not if you trust me." She took the bundle from his hands. "Change your clothes. And listen carefully. This is what you need to do." She spent the next hour laying out the plan, detailing every step Thomas needed to take, every word he needed to say. She told him about the contact, a woman named Magnolia, who ran a small millinery shop just across the lines. She explained the code words he needed to use, the signals he needed to watch for. She drilled him on the information he needed to gather, emphasizing the importance of accuracy and detail. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, Eleonora watched as Thomas, dressed in tattered Confederate clothing, slipped away into the woods. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was it. Her plan was in motion. Now all she could do was wait. The next few weeks were agonizing. Every day felt like an eternity. She found it difficult to concentrate. On her duties, her mind constantly racing, wondering if Thomas was safe, if he was gathering the information she needed, if he would ever return. She kept replaying their conversation in her head, second-guessing herself, wondering if she had made the right decision. One evening, while on patrol, she noticed a familiar face lurking near the edge of the camp. It was Finch. He beckoned her over, his expression grim. "We need to talk, Eleonora," he said, his voice low. "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "There's been a change of plans. Your monthly leave is coming up again. And this time, you're not going alone." "What do you mean?" Eleonora asked, her voice barely a whisper. The blood felt like ice water in her veins. Finch's gaze flickered around the perimeter, ensuring they weren't overheard. "The Colonel's grown suspicious, your absences. They haven't gone unnoticed. He's sending someone with you. To observe." Her stomach clenched. "Observe what? My feminine hygiene?" The sarcasm dripped from her tone, a thin veil over the rising panic. "Don't play coy, Eleonora. He suspects something. He hasn't outright accused you of treason, but he wants assurance. Someone loyal, someone he trusts, to vouch for your activities." "And who is this chaperone?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Finch hesitated. "Corporal Davies." Davies. A pious, humorless man, known for his unwavering loyalty to the Union and his equally unwavering adherence to regulations. He was also unfortunately sharp. Eleonora had always made an effort to avoid him, sensing a distrust in his cold, grey eyes. "Davies?" she repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He'll see through me in a heartbeat. Then you'll have to be more convincing," Finch said, his voice hardening. "This isn't optional, Eleonora. Refusal is unthinkable. If you want to keep Thomas safe, if you want to keep yourself safe, you'll play along. And you'll make sure Davies sees nothing but what you want him to see." "And if Davies reports back that I'm a traitor?" she asked, the question heavy with dread. Finch sighed, the sound lost in the rustling leaves. "Then we're all in trouble, big trouble, Thomas especially." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "He's relying on you, Eleonora. We all are." The weight of responsibility crashed down on her, suffocating. She had to protect Thomas, protect herself, and somehow protect the Union, all while under the watchful gaze of a man who already suspected her. It felt impossible. "When?" she asked, resigned. "Tomorrow morning. He's been told you require assistance with supplies, medical supplies specifically. for certain feminine ailments. Finch's discomfort was almost comical, but Eleonora was far from amused. "Charming," she muttered. "He'll be expecting a show then." "Exactly. A convincing one. Now, get some rest. You'll need it." Finch turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "Eleonora, be careful. This is more dangerous than anything you've done so far." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As Finch disappeared into the darkness, she leaned against a nearby tree, the rough bark digging into her back. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. Davies couldn't see her meeting with Thomas. He couldn't see her passing information. He couldn't see anything that would betray her. She had to create a diversion, a smokescreen. But what? Suddenly an idea sparked in her mind. It was risky, bordering on insane, but it was the only thing she could think of that might work. She would play into Davies's expectations, exaggerating the very thing he suspected. She would become the helpless, emotionally fragile woman he expected her to be. So consumed by her supposed ailment that she wouldn't be capable of treason. It was a dangerous gamble, but with Thomas's life hanging in the balance, she had no other choice. She spent the rest of the night meticulously planning her performance. She rummaged through her meager belongings, finding a small empty vial she could use to feign illness. She practiced her lines, rehearsing the tearful confessions and pathetic pleas she would need to deliver. She would be the picture of feminine frailty, a woman so consumed by her own weakness that no one would ever suspect her of being a spy. The next morning dawned grey and cold. Eleonora forced herself to eat a small breakfast, trying to settle the churning in her stomach. She could feel Davies's eyes on her from across the camp, his gaze unwavering and judgmental. As she prepared to leave, Finch approached her, his expression unreadable. He handed her a small, tightly wrapped package. "For Thomas," he said quietly. "He needs this." Eleonora took the package, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Be careful, Eleonora," Finch said, his voice barely audible. "And remember, we're all counting on you." She nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. Taking a deep breath, she turned and walked towards Davies, ready to begin the most dangerous performance of her life. Eleonora nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. Taking a deep breath, she turned and walked towards Davies, ready to begin the most dangerous performance of her life. Davies, a gruff man with a perpetual scowl etched into his face, barely acknowledged her approach. "Ready, Thomas?" he barked, his voice raspy from years of cheap whiskey and shouting orders. "Yes, sir," she replied, pitching her voice deeper, forcing the timbre to match the imagined Thomas. The desertion was simple enough, a prearranged absence. Davies looked the other way as Thomas slipped into the pre-dawn mist. It was the return that was the delicate dance. Each month, the reasons for Thomas's brief disappearances varied. A sick mother, a gambling debt, a yearning for home. Each excuse was meticulously crafted, delivered with the right amount of shame and remorse. She practiced in the mirror, mastering the slumped shoulders, the downcast eyes, the mumbled apologies. The union, in turn, seemed almost eager to accept Thomas back, always short on manpower. Each return earned him a little more trust, a little more access. And with each return, she brought information gleaned during her desertion. Troop movements, supply routes, weaknesses in the Confederate defenses. Finch's network was a well-oiled machine, providing her with the details she needed to be convincing. This time, however, things felt different. The package from Finch, clutched tight in her pocket, was heavier than usual. The information he had hinted was crucial. And Davies's gaze, though still gruff, held a flicker of something else, suspicion. The days bled into weeks. Thomas performed his duties, cleaning rifles, digging trenches, listening to the idle chatter of his fellow soldiers. She meticulously gathered information, piecing together the Confederate plans like a fragile mosaic. The package from Finch burned a hole in her pocket, a constant reminder of the stakes. One evening, huddled around a meager fire, Sergeant Miller, a wiry man with eyes that missed nothing, fixed her with a stare. "Thomas," he said, his voice low, "you seem different lately." She stiffened, her heart pounding in her chest. "Different, sir?" "Yeah, quieter, more focused." He paused, taking a long drag from his pipe. "You wouldn't be thinking of deserting again, would you?" She forced a laugh, the sound hollow even to her own ears. Deserting, sir? Never. I'm here to fight for the Confederacy. Miller studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. That's what I thought. Just making sure you haven't lost your enthusiasm. The encounter left her shaken. Miller wasn't buying it. She knew it in her bones. She needed to get the information in Finch's package to the Union lines, and she needed to do it soon. But how the opportunity came unexpectedly. A small scouting party was being sent out to assess Union positions. Thomas was chosen to go along. It was a risky move, but it was her only chance. As they rode through the dense woods, the tension was palpable. The leader of the patrol, a lieutenant named Jackson, was a hard man known for his ruthlessness. He kept a close eye on everyone, especially Thomas. They reached a ridge overlooking a Union encampment. Jackson pulled out his spyglass, studying the activity below. "See anything interesting, Thomas?" he asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. She peered through her own spyglass, pretending to focus on the Union soldiers. In reality, she was scanning the landscape for a way to slip away, a moment of distraction. "Just the usual, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Soldiers drilling, tending to their horses." Suddenly, a shot rang out. Jackson screamed, clutching his arm. The patrol scattered, taking cover behind trees. It was an ambush. In the chaos, she saw her chance. While the others were engaged in the firefight, she slipped away, disappearing into the undergrowth. The sounds of gunfire faded behind her as she ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She knew they would be looking for her. She had to reach the Union lines, and she had to do it before they caught her. She stumbled through the woods, navigating by the position of the sun. The package from Finch felt heavier than ever, a physical manifestation of the responsibility she carried. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she saw them. Union soldiers, patrolling the edge of their territory. She raised her hands in the air, shouting, "Don't shoot! I have information!" They approached cautiously, their rifles trained on her. "Who are you?" one of them demanded. "My name is Eleonora," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'm a spy for the Union. I have information about Confederate troop movements." They looked at each other, skeptical. "A spy? And you just happened to be wandering out of the woods?" "I deserted," she said, knowing it was the only way they would believe her. "I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to come home." They lowered their rifles slightly, but their expressions remained wary. "All right," one of them said. "Let's hear what you have to say." She took a deep breath and began to tell them everything. The Confederate plans, the weaknesses in their defenses, the information contained in the package from Finch. As she spoke, she could see the doubt in their eyes slowly turning to belief. The information she provided was invaluable. It allowed the Union forces to anticipate a Confederate attack, saving countless lives. She was hailed as a hero, a decorated spy, but the accolades meant little to her. All she wanted was to end the war, to bring peace to a divided nation. And she knew that her work was far from over. The Confederacy still stood, and the fight for freedom was far from won. The next performance would have to be the best yet. The stakes were higher than ever. "So you're saying you want to go back?" The Union officer, a major with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, leaned back in his chair, the firelight glinting off his spectacles. He had listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes on a pad of paper. She nodded, the rough wool of her Union uniform scratching at her neck. "It's the only way. I have established a pattern. Disappearance followed by remorse. Any new face would be immediately suspect. They know me, and they trust you." He raised an eyebrow. "Enough." She avoided his gaze, focusing on the map spread across his desk. "They believe I'm disillusioned, homesick, eager to return to the fold." The major sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's a dangerous proposition. If they discover you—" "I understand the risk, sir." The thought of the consequences sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. "And this information you seek, it's worth the risk?" "Absolutely." She met his gaze, her voice firm. "They're planning something big, something that could turn the tide of the war. I need to know what it is." The major was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying her. Finally, he nodded. "All right. We'll do it your way. But you'll have a handler this time. Someone to relay information to. Someone to watch your back." She frowned. "I work alone. Not anymore, he countered, his voice brooking no argument. Too much is at stake. You'll meet him tomorrow. The next day dawned grey and cold. She stood in a secluded clearing, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. A figure emerged from the trees, cloaked and hooded. As he approached, he lowered the hood, revealing a young man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a wry smile. "Lieutenant Thomas Ashton, at your service," he said, extending a hand. She hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes steady.
Just she?
He asked, his smile widening slightly. Just she? She met his gaze. "I don't want you getting attached." He chuckled softly. Julie noted. "So tell me about this grand deception of yours. How exactly does one become a celebrated deserter?" She spent the next few hours outlining her plan, explaining the intricate web of lies and half-truths she had spun to gain the trust of the Confederates. Ashton listened intently, occasionally asking questions. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He was too perceptive, too quick to pick up on the subtle nuances of her story. "Impressive," he said when she had finished. "You've certainly thought this through, but remember, one slip-up, one moment of hesitation, and it's all over." "I know," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. That night, under the cover of darkness, she slipped back across the lines into the heart of the Confederacy. This time, however, she carried not only the weight of her mission, but also the knowledge that someone was watching her, someone who knew her secret. Days turned into weeks. She played her part to perfection, feigning remorse for her desertion, expressing her renewed loyalty to the Confederate cause. She listened, she observed, she gathered information. The Confederates, still wary but increasingly trusting, began to confide in her. She learned that the something big they were planning was a daring raid on a Union supply depot, a vital lifeline for the Union Army. The depot was lightly guarded, and the Confederates believed they could seize a massive amount of supplies, crippling the Union war effort. But there was a catch. The raid was scheduled to coincide with a diversionary attack on a nearby Union fort. The fort was heavily defended, and the attack was almost certain to fail. It was a suicide mission, designed to draw Union troops away from the depot. She knew she had to warn the Union forces, but she also knew that she couldn't simply disappear again. It would raise suspicion and jeopardize her entire operation. She needed a way to get the information to Ashton without blowing her cover. One evening, as she was helping to prepare supper for the Confederate officers, she accidentally spilled a pot of boiling water on her hand. The pain was excruciating, but she managed to keep her composure. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," one of the younger soldiers exclaimed, rushing to her aid. "It's all right, Private," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a bit clumsy, I suppose." The officers, concerned, insisted that she see the camp doctor. She knew this was her chance. She asked the private to send word to her aunt who lived nearby to come and help her. She knew that her aunt was actually a contact from the Union. The doctor, a gruff old man with a skeptical eye, examined her hand. "Nasty burn," he said. "Needs tending. I'll give you some ointment. You'll need to change the bandage every few hours." As he was bandaging her hand, she noticed a small scrap of paper lying on the table. It was a map of the area, with the location of the Union supply depot clearly marked. She knew she had to get it to Ashton. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she crept out of her tent and made her way to the designated rendezvous point. Ashton was waiting for her, his face etched with concern. "What happened to your hand?" he asked, his voice low. "It's nothing," she said, dismissing his concern. "I have the information you need." She quickly explained the Confederate plan, emphasizing the importance of the supply depot and the diversionary attack on the fort. She then handed him the scrap of paper she had taken from the doctor's table. "This is the location of the depot," she said. "They plan to hit it hard. You need to warn them." Ashton studied the map for a moment, his brow furrowed. "This is invaluable," he said. "But how did you get it?" She hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to tell him. I have my ways," she said finally. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You're taking too many risks, he said softly. "You need to be careful." "I know," she replied, her voice barely audible. But I have to do what I can. I understand, he said, his voice filled with compassion. Just promise me you'll be careful. She nodded, unable to speak. She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, but she also knew that she couldn't turn back. Too much was at stake. The fate of the Union, the lives of countless soldiers, rested on her shoulders. And she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The game was afoot, and it was time to play the final hand. She nodded, unable to speak. She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, but she also knew that she couldn't turn back. Too much was at stake. The fate of the Union, the lives of countless soldiers, rested on her shoulders, and she was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The game was afoot, and it was time to play the final hand. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek. "Promise me, he repeated, his voice low and urgent. "Promise me you'll come back to me." The plea in his eyes almost broke her resolve. She hadn't allowed herself to think about coming back, about a future. Focusing on the present, on the mission, was the only way to keep the fear at bay. But looking into his face, seeing the genuine worry etched there, she couldn't deny him. "I promise," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He pulled her closer, holding her tight. The warmth of his embrace was a stark contrast to the biting November wind that whipped around them. For a moment, she allowed herself to be enveloped in the comfort, to imagine a life where such moments weren't stolen and fleeting. He released her, his gaze still locked on hers. "When do you leave?" "Tonight," she replied, the word like a stone in her mouth. "Under cover of darkness." "Where are you going this time?" he asked, a hint of resignation in his voice. He knew she wouldn't divulge everything, but he had to ask. She hesitated. "Near Richmond," she said finally. "They're moving supplies. I need to know where, what kind, and how many." His face hardened. Richmond was a viper's nest, the heart of the Confederacy. The risks were exponentially higher there. "That's too dangerous, Let someone else go." "There is no one else, Thomas," she said, her voice firm. "I'm the only one who can do this." He swore softly under his breath. He knew she was right. Her unique position, her ability to seemingly disappear and reappear at will, made her indispensable. But that didn't make it any easier to bear. "Be careful," he said again, the words a desperate plea. "Please, just be careful." "I will," she said, forcing a smile. "Now I need to go. I have preparations to make." She turned to leave, but he caught her arm. He said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything you're doing." She met his gaze, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and pain. "I'm doing it for us, Thomas," she said softly, "for a future where we can be together, without fear." She pulled away gently and walked towards the stables, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. The night was coming, and with it, the next act in her dangerous charade. She had to become someone else again, a ghost in the enemy's camp, gathering the information that could turn the tide of the war. The hours before her departure were a blur of activity. She meticulously cleaned her rifle, ensuring every part was oiled and functioning flawlessly. She packed her meager supplies, dried meat, hardtack, a small flask of whiskey, and a map of the region around Richmond. She wrote a letter to her sister, a letter she hoped would never need to be sent, but one that contained instructions should the worst happen. As darkness fell, she donned her disguise, a tattered Confederate uniform, acquired from a prisoner of war that fit loosely on her frame. She dirtied her face with charcoal, obscuring her features, and tucked her long hair under a worn cap. Looking in the small cracked mirror, she barely recognized herself. She was no longer the Union spy. She was just another weary Confederate soldier trying to survive. She slipped out of the camp unnoticed, melting into the shadows. The air was crisp and cold, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. She made her way towards the edge of the Union lines, her heart pounding in her chest. Reaching the perimeter, she approached the sentry, a young man barely out of his teens. He squinted at her through the darkness, his rifle raised. "Halt! Who goes there?" he demanded. "Corporal Johnson, 3rd Virginia," she replied, her voice rough and gravelly. "Lost my unit in the skirmish near Manassas. Been trying to find my way back." The sentry eyed her suspiciously. "Let me see your papers." She reached into her pocket and produced a forged pass, complete with a Confederate seal. The sentry examined it closely, his brow furrowed. "This looks all right," he said finally, handing the pass back to her. "But you're a long way from home, Corporal. Good luck getting back to your unit." "Thank you," she said, offering a curt nod. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made it. She was behind enemy lines. As she disappeared into the darkness, she knew that the real challenge was just beginning. She had to navigate the treacherous landscape, serve Confederate territory, evade patrols, and gather the information she needed, all while maintaining her disguise and avoiding detection. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, could mean capture, torture, and death. But she couldn't afford to think about the risks. She had a mission to complete, a promise to keep, and a future to fight for. She was the ghost soldier, the Union's secret weapon. And she was ready to play her final hand. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "You're taking too many risks, he said softly. "You need to be careful." "I know," she replied, her voice barely audible, "but I have to do what I can." "I understand," he said, his voice filled with compassion. "Just promise me you'll be careful." She nodded, unable to speak. She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, but she also knew that she couldn't turn back. Too much was at stake. The fate of the Union, the lives of countless soldiers, rested on her shoulders, and she was determined to see it through no matter the cost. The game was afoot, and it was time to play the final hand. The following month she deserted again. This time the information she carried was crucial. The Confederate Army's planned assault on a seemingly impenetrable Union stronghold. Knowing the attack point allowed the Union to prepare, fortify, and ultimately decimate the Confederate forces. The victory was decisive, a turning point in the war, but her actions had not gone unnoticed. Confederate intelligence had grown suspicious of the repeated disappearances and the uncanny accuracy of Union defenses. A trap was set. Her contact, a sympathetic farmer near the border, had been replaced. When she arrived disguised as a weary traveler seeking shelter, she was met with cold steel and steely eyes. "Welcome home, deserter," the Confederate officer sneered. She didn't panic. Years of deception had honed her instincts. "I'm lost, sir," she stammered, feigning fear. "I just need directions. Lost, are you? Or lost her to us?" He gestured, and 2 soldiers grabbed her. She fought, but they were too strong. They dragged her to a makeshift prison, a damp, rat-infested cellar. Days turned into nights. Interrogations were brutal, relentless. They wanted names, dates, contacts. She gave them nothing. She endured the pain, the hunger, the fear, clinging to the hope that she would be rescued, that the Union would not abandon her. One morning, a different officer entered. He was older, his eyes holding a flicker of something akin to respect. "We know who you are, he said quietly. "We know what you've done. You're a remarkable woman. A waste, fighting for the wrong side." He offered her a deal: betray the Union and her life would be spared. She would live comfortably, even be rewarded. She looked at him, her eyes filled with defiance. "The only waste here," she said, her voice hoarse but firm, "is the lives you're throwing away for a lost cause." The officer sighed. So be it. Her execution was scheduled for dawn. As she waited in the darkness, she thought of her family, her friends, the soldiers she had helped save. She had no regrets, but dawn never came. The air crackled with gunfire. The cellar door burst open and Union soldiers flooded in. Leading the charge was the same captain who had recruited her, his face grim but relieved. "We got your message," he shouted over the din. "We knew they'd caught you." The battle was swift and decisive. The Confederate outpost was overrun. She was free. Back in Union territory, she was hailed as a hero. She received medals, commendations, the gratitude of a nation. But she refused the accolades. She had done what she believed was right, and that was reward enough. The war ended. The Union was preserved, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Years later, she returned to her hometown. She found peace in a small farm, tending to the land and raising a family. She never spoke of her wartime experiences, not even to her children. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, her grandson found a small, tarnished medal tucked away in a dusty trunk. He brought it to her, his eyes wide with curiosity. She took the medal, her fingers tracing the inscription. A faint smile touched her lips. "That," she said, her voice soft and distant, "is a story for another time." She looked out at the fields, at the vibrant green of the crops, a stark contrast to the blood-soaked battlefields of her past. The air was filled with the chirping of crickets, a peaceful symphony that drowned out the echoes of gunfire. In her eyes there was a quiet strength, a deep-seated resolve that had seen her through the darkest of times. She had faced death, defied the odds, and helped shape the course of history. She was a soldier, a spy, a survivor. And now she was home. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, and in that moment